Firstly, we have an annoying legal disclaimer. All views expressed are our own and do not represent the opinions of any employers, organisations or clients for whom we work. Any recommendations or advice given in this podcast may or may not be right for you depending on your circumstances. Please bear this in mind before taking any action. Charting Tracks is brought to you by Amir Yaqub, Chris O'Gorman and myself, Ben Hennessy-Garside. Amir is a record producer, Grammy Award-winning engineer, a co-owner of Bison Productions recording studios in East London and the director of Garnish Music Production School in London. Chris is a digital marketing strategist and digital manager. He's worked previously for Sony Music and was the head of digital at Capitol Records UK. He currently runs a digital marketing agency and develops music artists, working on brand development and marketing strategies. I am a singing coach, multi-instrumentalist, composer and producer. In the past, I've worked in music instrument retail as a record label scout, a live sound engineer, and I'm currently a lecturer at Leeds Conservatoire, teaching voice to popular music students, alongside being a dad and husband. This is the first episode of Charting Tracks. I do hope you enjoy it. Hello everybody and welcome to Charting Tracks. It took us a while to come up with a name. We came up with one, we got one. Charting Tracks is what we landed on. My name is Ben. This is Amir.
Yo.
And this is Chris.
Hello. Hi.
For those of you who are listening on audio and aren't seeing this, Chris just waved in advance of that little hi. Yeah, it was a good wave. I liked it. What is this podcast about then? It's a holistic guide for professional music makers. And what do we mean by holistic? Part of my kind of development has been all over the place musically. And so I wanted to try and put something together which would cover a kind of quite a holistic frame, to take a look at lots of different parts of music, the music industry, what's linked, how all the different sections are connected. Because my journey hasn't been particularly straightforward, and I don't know anyone for whom that's been the case. I think both Amir and Chris, who are joining me today, and who will be joining me throughout the series, thankfully, I think they've probably had similar stories, but maybe I'll let them explain for themselves. So, Amir, like, what is this podcast for you? Like, what's it about?
Well, I think when we initially talked about what we discussed, because there's more to it, which we'll let you guys know about at some stage. But when we initially discussed it, and the name and the concept came around, the word, particularly the word holistic, I think had great meaning. And if I'm thinking about my personal journey, I've been through various versions of myself, and I've kind of landed where I have. And I'm happy with that. But I think once we had discussed what we were going to talk about, what the word holistic particularly, and what this podcast means to me, obviously being joined by you two homies, is just the whole range, the whole spectrum of music creation. Because we're talking about us now, in an age where we can do so much, and in a way we kind of have to do so much as well. And really and truly that is reflected in some of our stories, but also just in the way that things are in general, in speaking to other people and working with other people. We see all of the things they have to do, and no one is just an artist anymore. They're also maybe a bit of a producer, and a bit of kind of like an amazing person on social media, and they might even be teaching people like voice lessons and stuff to make money and whatever. Like, this podcast really, for me, on a personal level, is to kind of bring together all of the different versions of myself, and you know, along with you guys, kind of share as much of that as possible, and hopefully help some people out.
Yeah. Just a little bit on that before we bring Chris in, if that's okay, because for me, my experience has been that every single one of the little stages that I've been through, I wouldn't be the practitioner that I am today if it wasn't for all of them.
Yeah.
It's like the little breadcrumb trail of different little gigs, different bits of this, bits of that. All of them have ended up feeding the whole. Quite a lot of content online feels a little bit kind of like it's focused in quite specific places. So you know, there'll be you'll be listening to a podcast about, maybe it's audio recording, or you'll be listening to a podcast about the music industry, or you'll be listening to a podcast about specifically online marketing, or there are a whole host of different podcasts about quite specific things. But this sense of trying to get a view of the whole of it, looking at the different ways, different sections of the whole music world interconnect, feels vital. So yeah, okay, Chris.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I've come into this similar, having studied music and pretty much all of my life, and sort of went through various stages of thinking my career would be one thing, and then it's been something different. Wanting to be a classical flute player at one point, and then realizing that's not going to happen, and then wanting to be a songwriter and doing the music production degree that I did, which is where we all met. And then thinking I'm going to be a songwriter and producer, and going into sort of finding a way into the industry after that, and then sort of landing where I have in this weird sort of because I suppose my sort of arriving in the music industry coincided with the industry becoming super digitized. Everything from digital, social media and digital marketing to streaming, etc. So I've sort of ended up in the area that I have in music, which is in digital marketing, working for Sony Music and then for Capitol Records and Universal Music. Like you guys mentioned a moment ago, there's lots of stuff out there. It's like how how to grow your social media following, or how to sort of how to break into the music industry, how to build a fan base. But there's like nothing out there that seems that connects them all together, I suppose. And I work with lots of independent artists, and that they when they come to me, they'll kind of like want to know how to build their fan bases, etc., and want to know how to progress in their careers, and how to put a product together, and how to market, etc. And the thing that they don't tend to have thought about first, and which is what I always want to talk to them about, is take a step back and go, why do we want to do this in the first place? Why do you want this for your career? Because if it's to make if it's to make money, you probably chose the wrong thing. And I think that's the thing, as we started having conversations about how all of these different areas of music, not just the music industry, but the kind of music education, and one of the things that sort of I think kept coming up was, well, hang on, why are we doing this in the first place? Why do you even want to do this? What is the inspiration for it? What is the aspiration? What's the drive? I think that's a really interesting question, because I think people get into it thinking it's one thing, and then it actually is something completely else, and it changes as you go through it as well. And maybe the reason you stay in it is very different to why you originally got into it. So I think that's an interesting area to delve into.
Definitely, and I think that's a really nice little segue there, Chris, into what we would, the kind of what we were going to be talking about today. The question would be, what is music, and why do we love it? And I was thinking in advance of this podcast about maybe just framing that question with a few other little kind of other words to just kind of help divert the conversation slightly. So the one was individually, right? So what is music, and why do we love it as an individual, like ourselves as individuals?
Yeah, of course.
listeners then can maybe get to know us as individuals a little better. The other thing is, what is music and why do we love it, kind of socially and culturally? Okay, so in terms of the species, right? And then we could maybe dig into some science as well. Obviously, and all three of us did a production degree together, so there's a certain amount of kind of nuts and bolts scientific knowledge there. But there's also like some biology as well. Like music serves some kind of quite hard and fast function, and that hard and fast function is quite important to remember, along with one's own individual journey through music and the kind of socio-cultural stuff as well.
Defo.
Does anyone want to kick off with their thoughts, given what I've just laid out?
I will start only because, you know, one of my favorite books in music that I read, actually, like, what, because it was probably released, I can't even remember when it was released, was This Is Your Brain on Music by Daniel Levitin. And it's a book that I often do teaching and mentoring myself. And it's a book that I suggest that everyone reads because it looks at, you know, one person's journey, the author's journey, as it were, into studying it on a kind of like a neuroscientific level, but also, you know, looking at the social and the cultural aspects of it. And actually recently I'm a big fan of audiobooks, and obviously there's a big audiobook platform that I don't need to name because they don't need any free publicity. I mean, if they want to pay me, then great, but
always looking for the dollar.
They had a sale on some courses, right? And one of the courses was I think it's called like Music and the Brain. So I'd been listening to that because obviously when we had sat down and we'd said, you know, we'd be talking about this, that, and the next, I thought to myself, well, you know, a good time for me to just freshen up my knowledge a little bit. And I'll start off with something which kind of lands not culturally, but more in a very interesting kind of way. In the audiobook that I'm referring to, there was a series of studies done, and it's so very interesting when you think about us as human beings and how we experience music. And if we want to think of another musical creature, for instance, a bird. So a bird's thought of as a musical creature because, you know, bird song and all of that kind of stuff. And they did a study which I found so very interesting, and it really taps into what the essence of us and music is, like just experiencing music. They did a study where they played a bird a series of ascending and descending, not scales, but more like melodies. And the birds couldn't notice the patterns of relative pitch in the way that we can. And that's for someone who's not actually even musical. So like, for instance, they do like one pattern and then they'd transpose it up, you know, 3 semitones or whatever. And the birds couldn't recognize the pattern as being the same, but we can as humans. And it kind of goes to show that there's so much of a link to music with particularly, you know, human beings as a species, that even, you know, a species that we consider as musical, birds, because they communicate via bird song. I thought that that summed a lot of things up for me. A lot of things. I think it's a good place to start when you're talking about music, particularly, you know, in this episode for me, because, you know, we've all experienced music in so many different ways, but we also experienced it in life, you know, like it's part of the fabric of everything that we do. You know, and again, kind of going back to some of the studies that were done, it's got a lot to do with, you know, just even the way that we speak. So you know, if I was to speak to you and then I went da 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 da, you'd go, oh, that guy's saying something. It's potentially a question. or like listening to these patterns and inflections, and the communication in the human voice, which we've been doing since whenever. Like the first bone flute was found like however many 40,000 years ago or whatever, but music probably as an art form predates that. So that's where I want to kick off. And I want to know what you guys think.
I think that's the thing for me, is that music predates language.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of crazy. But like a baby, for instance, cries before it, forms words and stuff. So its first sort of instinct is to make a noise to communicate something, is to and crying can be quite sort of the most raw form of expression. And I think that's kind of what, for me, I suppose, what music is. It's trying to get something out there, trying to express something, trying to communicate something. It can take lots of different forms, lots of different genres, etc. But I think it's interesting to me that that's a constant in human beings, like you're saying, is to want to either make some form of music, even if you're not a musical person. It's not something you're doing as a career, or something you do even as a hobby. Like most people will hum something that they've heard, or will sing in the shower, or so there's an obvious drive to want to create some form of music, even for people that aren't musical, or that aren't musicians. And I think, where does that come from, and why does it persist?
A number of early instruments have been some of the early stringed instruments were developed through bows, as in bow and arrow bows.
Ah, okay, yeah.
So there's a link between sound and its functional use. And I think humans, we're kind of meaning-making machines, right? And we like to look at the world, and we like to kind of link things together, link ideas together. We have sensory inputs like all the other animals do, but we're very good at kind of finding novel connections between things. It's interesting that you mentioned the stuff about children crying, Chris, because in my own work as a vocal coach, I use a system based on primal sounds, primal noises. And so there are a number of reflexive noises that we like to make. It's nice to use those when teaching people to sing, because there's a lot of efficiency that feels almost pre-programmed, pre-wired in, like a baby calling out, like it's not been trained to do that, but it's loud, right?
Yeah.
And,
it'll get your attention.
There's a sense of them, although not cognitively like knowing what they're doing, there's a sense of them as an organism knowing exactly what's going on, which muscles in all the right places.
Yeah. Evolution has made it that way. Yeah.
Has built it that way. And yet we have this thing where we can take those basic elements and we can make art from it, right? So what's going on with that? Like, what's that about? Have you got any thoughts?
What, as in taking all of these noises and turning them into art?
Yeah, like what's maybe a deeper question, why not, would be to ask like, why art? What is art? Why is art?
There you go. That's a whole nother podcast in itself, really.
It is, right? It's someone in your studio.
Yeah.
Has literally got that. Yeah. But if we just nick that question and shift that to the musical sphere, like what's maybe not what is art, but why do we make art? Why do you make art? Musical art. Why do you make music?
Interesting. I'll pass over to Chris for now.
Well, if I go back to...
Sorry, I landed it.
The earliest I think back... Well, it's interesting. I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, when I first started being drawn to like making music, it would have been early childhood. Like I know I wanted drums. like the kid drums, like I know, and I wanted to just hit something and make a noise. I just know that's what I wanted to do, but most kids do. But then it was like, oh, okay, there are. For some reason, I was attracted to lots of woodwind instruments, and I don't know if it was just because they were shiny, but I was really attracted to the flute, for instance, and that's like the main instrument I started learning. And I don't know, there was something in me as a kid that was like, I want to learn that instrument so that I can then make some kind of noise. And I don't know if it was just because it looked pretty and it was shiny. It probably was that, let's be honest. Why I stuck with that is probably more of the question, because it's like, most kids I think will kind of like have a term of like learning the violin and probably give it up as quickly as they started and then move on to something else, and then, or just not move on to any other instrument, just be like they went through their instrument phase, or that parents will kind of make them learn an instrument and they'll give it up as soon as they possibly can. And I suppose why I was particularly wanting to continue with it and want to not even continue to actually actively being like, please let me have a lesson, I think comes from some urge of just needing to create something, because something beyond being able to just sing a little bit in tune. Wanting to take this and develop it into some kind of something more tangible, something more. I think actually at that point you start then becoming aware of other music around you. You start becoming aware of like whether it's the classics or whether it's like the pop music in the charts, or whether it's you start becoming aware of that and start connecting the two things together and going, oh, that looks really fun, and this is quite fun too. So yeah, I want to learn how to do this a bit more. It's just a higher level of quality. There's a point I think where you're like, this is fun for me to just make noises and stuff, but actually there are people that make noises and make them sound really nice and actually do them really well, and they're really catchy and really, and then they're on the radio and I think at a certain point there was like those two things are connected, so I want to be able to do that to a higher level.
So there's something in what you're saying about, and there was a phrase you used at the beginning of that, which was, I wanted just to hit thing and make a sound. And then there's kind of that theme, at least a part of what you've just said, seems to travel right the way through. There's a sense of you wanting to create something, make it better, have some kind of impact in the world. It's that. I mean, you made a good sound there. Is that like?
Impact. I think it is like making
something about
some
that
kind of impact. To
and then the refinement process too is like making more of an impact.
Yeah.
Right.
Because then the more you refine it, the more I suppose it becomes like, it then turns into an art form, and then it's something that will potentially be recorded and be, something that's enjoyed by other people. I think that's the thing. There's a bit where it flips over from, I want to do this because it's fun and I want to make a noise and I want to make an impact, to now I want you to hear me. I want other people to hear this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's probably the flipping, the part where it flips. I'm not sure exactly where that stage was. I think it was like it would have been some terrible flute recital that I'm sure I made people sit through. But I thought they should hear me play Twinkle Twinkle Little Damn Star on a flute.
Well, how?
I thought their lives would be enriched by hearing that. Okay,
exactly.
So as a mode of communication then, like it's not just about you doing your thing, it's about reaching other people.
Yeah. I think it becomes that. It does. I don't think it starts. I don't think it starts as that, but maybe it always is that from just for yourself. Or are you trying to get some attention? Or are you trying to affect something around you? Are you trying to?
Well,
Are you just trying to piss off your parents?
Yeah. This is. I mean, like this is what I found interesting about what you said as well, Chris. Is I have a nephew who's now like 6-7 years old. And I got him a drum set when he was 4 or 5, right? And again, it was a kid's drum set, whatever. And he just wanted to hit it. He wasn't thinking to himself, oh yeah, well, if I play this like this, then I'll have a lovely 6/8 pattern going on, and if I adjust it slightly, then I'll get a nice little shuffle.
Yeah.
It was like he was just doing something that was within him to create some noise. Now the reasons for that are the reasons they make. I mean, I wouldn't want to speculate what they are, but there is something inside of him which wants to make some noise. And I think it's funny that you started off with that, Chris, because making noise is making noise, but making art is something else, right? I mean, that's what we would think. But then again, there are the people who go, well, how can you define what art is and all of this kind of stuff? Let's not get into that so much. It starts off with something that's inside of us that makes us want to do a given thing, and then continuing that on to whatever degree you do. And again, it's funny that you mentioned the violin, because that's my first instrument, funnily enough, right?
I feel like the violin's most people's first instrument.
Hey,
and
man,
I don't know why, because
banging instrument. It's amazing.
The thing is, it's the last instrument that you want to hear someone learn on.
It's the hardest instrument to play as well.
It's hard when it's sat and when it's beautiful when it's mastered. But you don't want to hear someone learn
it takes you a long time to get there, right? And there's so much discipline that goes into it and so much technique. But I went on and did that until grade 5, and then I stopped wanting to make a noise, really, because I personally wasn't I feel like this is within me or part of me or whatever. And then I kind of rediscovered music probably some years later, not too long later, but some years later, and then I wanted to turn it into something which was songs, which to me were these basically organized sound, right? It was organized noise. So I was just like, oh yeah, well, if I put this chord here, and then if I sing this melody over those chords, then I've got something which sounds really good to me. It was obviously crap, like my early songs were just but it's funny that for me it was kind of like I dropped away, and then I kind of came back on another instrument as well, on the piano. But I came back, and I all of a sudden I wanted to create art, as in songs, which are art, aren't they? What's your experience, Ben? What do you think?
So, I mean, the violin is interesting, because I did the violin for a term.
Well, everyone plays the violin at some point, right?
At school. I don't know if that could be a UK schools thing. It could be a UK schools thing.
But
it is, yeah.
Or
they probably paid our parents to make us do it.
There's probably a surplus of violin somewhere.
But I think a bit like you and Mia, I kind of I didn't practice very much when I was young. So I'm saying a bit like you. I've no idea whether you practice very much, but I gave up. One of the reasons was because I didn't practice very much. And then it wasn't until I was kind of about 12, and there was also something about my mum got me this jazz piano teacher, and he wasn't professional or anything. He was doing an IT degree up at the local uni near me, but alongside that he played some jazz piano, and I think to make a bit of money on the side during his studies, he was teaching some jazz piano. And that was when so piano, I say, is my first instrument, because it was then that I first really, practiced. Not a lot, 10, 15 minutes a day, but I did it fairly regularly, and I made measurable, noticeable progress. And there's something I've heard that during that period of life, that those teenage years, there's something about manipulating the hands that's really quite important, and quite often it's why people will pick up a musical instrument at that time. It's that in a number of different ways. Being able to manipulate your fingers will support your cognition in a whole heap of different ways that are useful to you, and quite often people kind of just get a sense that it's good for them, so they'll do that. But there also was there's this sense of mastery too. I couldn't make my fingers do this thing, and then if I practiced, I found that I could. Jazz, I just, very. It was kind of. I mean, I say it was jazz. It was bluesier jazz. There was a strong focus on rhythm. The kind of nice, interesting, extended, kind of lighter, sort of chordal, melodic stuff. I got into later on, but that, quite bluesy sort of jazz stuff. Notes that didn't always clash, and didn't always always sit well with each other. That they were clashing.
But on the piano, it sounds nice. And like on the violin.
Well, I mean, I remember being a kid because I was lucky enough to have a piano in the front room, and we lived in, like, it was a little two up, two down terrace in a northern city, but Mum found the space to put a piano in, but I remember being told off for like plinking on the keys as a youngster, like. So I enjoyed that, but this thing about noise, though, Amir, is I don't know if it goes. I mean, there are entire genres which are basically that, aren't there?
Yeah, well, I know. I know this.
or when music starts to disappear a little too far up its own backside, quite often you'll find a genre starts to emerge that's like, no, we just need to make some noise. Like often that kind of seems to happen, certainly within the pop music sphere, which is my bag. So, and by pop I mean popular music. I don't mean necessarily,
what's hot.
Right. Sugar coated pop music. Yeah, I mean, like punk and grunge and metal, and there's this noisiness in all of that, and also like rock and roll, kind of as distinct from the kind of jazz stuff that was coming out at the time, the big band jazz stuff that was coming out at the time. Noise is important, I think.
Well, I mean, yeah, noise is important, but for me, it's the organization of noise which makes it, lean more towards being, well, to my ear, a little bit more accessible,
Right.
I'm not going to sit there and listen to 3 minutes of white noise and go, wow, what a fantastic performance that was, because it's just not going to work, is it? Like, not for me personally, obviously. But
there probably is. There will be a bunch of people.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, and if there isn't already, then there will be after this podcast. Someone, I'm going to upload, 2.5 minutes of white noise only on YouTube, and get loads of clicks and basically make loads of money. White noise, however, is really helpful to help you to tune out. So like,
right,
it helps some people to go to sleep and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, because that sort of like, it sort of leads on to why people enjoy music in the first. Like, there's why we want to make it, or people that want to make it. Then why do people want to listen to it?
Yeah, that's very true.
Is it soothing? Is it stimulating? I mean,
there are
the different reasons.
I mean, there are so many different reasons. Like, right, when you start to, I mean, like, let's just take personal experience. Okay, so Ben, give me a situation where you want to listen to music, and why is it that you want to do that? Now, let's say you're in your car, right, and you're driving somewhere. Are you listening to music?
Sometimes.
And on the times that you are, why are you listening to music?
So when you first asked that question, I had an answer, but it wasn't in my car. But narrowing that down, I quite like the fact that you put kind of a little box around it.
I had to, because it's you, Ben.
Because it's me. So why in that moment will I choose? Often I'll want to sing.
Yeah.
So I'll want to remember. I'll want to change in how I'm feeling. Its use as a memory tool. I mean, where they've done studies into Alzheimer's, for example, it's often that music is often the thing that the last thing that disappears. Like, their memory of music, of different songs, is often one of the last things that goes. There's something that it does perhaps at the level of the brain, that allows connections of loads of different kinds to be made, you know. I'm talking here, when I'm using the word memory as well, it's not just like here was an event, and when I put this piece of music on, that event will replay itself in my head, and I'll remember the event, you know, like a narrative, like a structure. There's like an embodied emotive memory as well, like a feeling, like that will emerge, you know, that I want to remember. And there are certain albums that I know if I put that thing on, I am going to feel a certain way.
Yeah, you're going to feel how you felt maybe at the time that you were listening to it initially.
Maybe, yeah. But I also think there's something intrinsic in music, and you know, maybe we'll get onto some music theory as the podcast goes on. There are also things like there were kind of almost scientific reasons why certain sounds feel like they work together and why certain sounds don't. Mm-hmm. But whatever it is that's going on, it helps me regulate my emotions.
Interesting way of thinking about it. Chris, what about you? If you're on the underground, I mean, which you're not that much now because of coronavirus, but if you're on the underground, why are you listening? If you are listening to music, which obviously, like, you know, us guys have said, we like listening to podcasts, we like listening to audiobooks, we like listening to music. But if you are listening to music, why are you listening to it?
I think for me, rather than it being because I want to change my mood, it's because I want something that reflects the mood that I'm currently in. So I want something that aligns with that. So, like today, it's gloriously sunny outside, so I want something that's like, I want to listen to some Buena Vista Social Club and Lupe or something like that.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah, I think for me, it's not so much I want to change my mood. It's almost like, it's funny because, like, you know, when people like, when they've got a heartbreak or something like that, they've just been dumped or something, and they're like, oh, people are like, oh, how, it's so crazy. Why are you there listening to all these really desperately sad heartbreak songs? It's like, surely you want something to snap you out of it. It's like, no, I want to I want to dwell and fester in my my current feeling, and I would like to find the saddest, most heartbreaking piece of music that I possibly can. Rather than, I mean, I don't know if that's just me. I think that's probably a lot of people, to be honest. It's like, you just want something that connects with how you're feeling in that moment. And for me, that's it's like, can it like I said, it can either be something as simple as the weather. If it's folky singer-songwritery or something, probably, to be honest, that tends to be a pattern that I've noticed.
That's pretty interesting as well.
But I feel like this is how I feel, and I want something that's gonna be the outward, some kind of outward version of that. Something that's going to be like, oh yeah, that's it. That's how I feel. So that's
the question that's arising for me as you're saying that is, well, what's beyond that? So you want to, you're feeling a certain way, and you reach for some music, right? When we were growing up, it was physically reaching for something, like
a CD,
you know,
or
actually getting a CD, or you know. But you know, maybe you know, you in your selection process on Spotify or whatever it is that you you use, other streaming services are available.
Are also available. Also very good.
Yeah. What are you getting from that music? Is it comfort? Is there something? Is there a sense of other people feel the same way that I do? Is it something about the world, you needing to feel like the world is reflecting back at you what you're already feeling, to be kind of held by it in some way? Or
it's probably, I think it's all of those things. I think it's more probably reflecting back what you're feeling, going, it's, you know, not just me, because
right,
go and look at the heartbreak songs on Spotify. I think it's because it's like, these are sort of universal themes and universal human emotions. So hearing other people talk about them in a tangible way, or turn them into a song that kind of puts them into some kind of tangible concept, just makes it a little less terrible if it's bad, and it makes it kind of a more joyful experience as well. If it's something happy, it's kind of, oh yeah, me too, oh them too. It's like we feel this,
Connection.
It is. I think that's kind of what it is. It's like you aren't experiencing something in silo. You're experiencing something that is like I say, a universal human trait. And I think on most levels that probably is a comfort thing. It probably is seeking out some kind of comforting, and it's a way of making sense of whatever it is you're experiencing.
Sense making.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe something to do with comfort, sense making, just feeling in some way connected to, the world.
Yeah.
And humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that would probably lead us to talking about more of the social aspect as well of music. And it's so funny how you can, like, just to pick up on what you said there, Chris and Ben, it's so funny how you can experience music by yourself but still feel so connected.
Yeah. Yeah.
I find that interesting, and well, I mean, I kind of like, in a way, like what both of you guys have said. Just on from my personal experience with music has rang very true. So sometimes I use it to change my mood. Sometimes I use it to reflect my mood. But also, I have this thing, and I don't know if this is just me, or I don't know if this is more of a universal thing, but I have a craving to listen to music. Like, so it's like, how you have a craving to have certain types of food, right? So I might go, oh, tonight I fancy a Chinese, or tonight I fancy this kind of food, or, whatever it is. I have a craving to listen to music. Is like a very strange thing, I find, but and it might be very specific. So, just like I go, oh yeah, I feel like having a Chinese. I might go, I feel like listening to, I don't know, Stevie Wonder, or it might just be a general thing of, well, put some goddamn music on because, I feel like listening to music, any music. And that's, I think, more than anything else nowadays, that's how I experience music, which is funny.
Like a craving.
Craving's a good word. I think that's a really good word.
Like, I have this craving. Sometimes it's very specific. Sometimes it's not so specific. And I don't know. I don't know how to... I don't know what it is. It's obviously a problem of some description.
You're just addicted.
I need to see.
I don't know. It's a healthy addiction, I think.
Yeah, it's a craving for like a certain genre, or for a certain mood, or for a certain... I think mood is the thing that it always comes back to for me, right?
Yeah, and do you know what? It's so funny you say that as well, Chris, because in a lot of the teaching I do, and in fact a lot of the work I do, I would have to think about the mood that is wanting to be portrayed, right? So like, there's no point in making an up-tempo record if someone's talking about, something that's not very fitting to that, or vice versa, right? And mood is like a huge thing, and is actually what you two particularly have spoken about as well. You spoke about changing your emotions. You talked about reflecting your emotions. It's all to do with mood, right? So, it kind of could we therefore then say music is part of our emotional experience?
Yeah. I want to just come back and link back into this point. I just want to come back to one other thing you said to me, if that's okay, because you mentioned that that sense of being connected, but also being by yourself. I mean, that experience of hearing music and not having other people around, that's a very, very modern phenomenon.
Oh yeah, of course it is. It's like brand new.
So it's no surprise that we can kind of hijack our systems to make us feel like there's someone else around. And music, like its function, whether it was a religious function or whether it was used to celebrate festivals, whether there's there's evidence that some of the cave paintings that they found, often the alongside the visual artwork that's there, there's a sense of them placing the visual art in places where there's some scientifically measurable resonance occurrences, right? So the art may well be in like a tuned space, like in the way you might tune
a room.
A room, yeah. I'm talking
this
from
room that I'm in. I tune studios all the time. Any room that I'm in, I'm tuning that room to give me certain frequencies and certain resonances, and take away certain ones.
Yeah.
Right. And presumably you're going to want something fairly kind of flat in a studio environment, right? Presumably.
Of course.
But this was very different. So in these cases, quite specific boosts and cuts of certain frequencies relative to sound was measured in a lot of the places where they placed the artwork. So, we trace our kind of visually symbolic and kind of spiritual stuff back a long, long way. But there's also this audio component, which I think is fascinating. There's a strong chance people were maybe singing or clapping or otherwise engaging in musical performance in those spaces. This thing about music as being a holder, like, people used to play together. Everyone would play. Pre-recording, there'd be a piano. Back in the days when sheet music was when you sold music, what you were selling was sheet music, right?
Sure. Yeah.
People would hang around pianos and they would all sing together, and that would be part of it, The group singing, like today, like you might find at a football match, or not right now because we're right in the middle of this coronavirus thing, but group singing on football matches, and it's a very collegiate activity. So it's no surprise at all that we can trick ourselves with recorded music into feeling connected where maybe we're feeling a little disconnected.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, like, just to bat that one back a little bit as well, like, yes, obviously this is a modern invention. Recorded music started when beginning of the 1900s, probably around somewhere around there. I should know this because I work in recorded music, but whatever.
Edison and his phonograph stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it started back then, and really, like, obviously as time has gone on, our accessibility has got so much better to music that we can, like, literally, you can stream anything off your phone. But I think there's something about the experience of music alone, which is obviously amazing and incredible, and it turns it into a personal, emotional experience, right? So for instance, and I probably shouldn't, well, no, I'm just going to say this, there's certain songs that will always make me cry, right? Now, obviously I would prefer to cry by myself, right? That's my preference, right? But sometimes, a song's on, or someone's performing a song, and it might be a new song or an old song. It might even be a really happy song, but it will make me cry. And that experience, I will take that experience back to when I'm listening to that song alone, and I'll probably cry as well, right? I'm not ashamed to admit it, like, it's absolutely fine. But that being a relatively new thing I think is like actually perhaps changing the way that we experience music and what music is to us as well. Because like, let's take your example, for instance, we're in a festival situation back in the day when, or not even back in the day, now, right, whenever the next festival arrives, like let's say Glastonbury, and we're all singing along to the headline act, and they're playing their big number and all of that kind of stuff. That is like amazing. And like, if we would obviously ever go back and listen to that song alone, we'd probably feel the same thing. But then there are certain things that we don't want to experience with people. I don't really want to like sit there listening to a Donny Hathaway song, like on the edge of tears with 20,000 people, because
Clearly never been to a Tori Amos concert.
But you get what I'm saying, right? I mean, like that's I mean, obviously historically there's so much of our history as human beings where we've experienced it. This is like literally a drop in the ocean in terms of where we are now, the ability to experience music alone. But it's one of those things which I find is pretty magical at times, actually.
I've just acknowledged a moment when you would hear it by yourself, by the way, and that's when you're performing and playing it yourself. So back then.
True.
But
Sorry, you mean playing it to playing
it? Yeah. So if you're a pianist and it's 1850,
yeah,
and there's no such thing as recorded music, but you're practicing,
right?
You're practicing your piano part by yourself.
Right.
You will be hearing music then. But that there's something qualitatively, I think, different to sitting and listening and performing at the same time. The experience is different.
The closest could be that the person next door is playing their piano and practicing, and you're hearing it through the wall,
right,
and experiencing it, because there's something else that's happening in the brain. Like your certain part of your brain is focusing on hitting the right notes and the mechanical element of it.
Yeah.
So it's not quite the same as still just sitting and just listening. Yeah.
See, I nearly then just said, but that even if you're listening through a wall, you still know there's a person that's playing it on the other side of it.
Unless it's one of those in like the old westerns.
Right, okay,
what's it called?
All right. Before then,
where the piano has the roll.
Piano rolls. Yeah,
and maybe you don't
before
know.
Them.
You don't know if it's one of those or no.
But,
so
but
in this time before that, it's a human being because there's no other way for it to.
But here's a question. I mean, here's a point though, right? Which is that a musician on every record you've heard. A musician at some point has made a decision, like another human being has made a decision to make some sounds in some kind of order and commit it to
a
recording medium, right? So you do know that there are other people around. Like in the act of hearing music, there is a sense of somebody being with you. Not there, like within, but there's something about them reaching through the medium into sound waves, having, once it's been converted into electricity and then maybe into digital information and then back out again, played with in the box or whatever, and then spat back out again. There is still that kind of thread of another human being on the end of that song or the end of that thing.
Yeah, even reaching through time as well. If it's someone that's an artist that's long since dead,
right?
They can still, they're still having a very visceral connection with you.
Yeah,
and it feels personal.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that we'll never really experience music alone.
Ooh.
Basically.
I think so.
Yeah.
And it's one of a few different ways that we can stay connected to each other.
Well, yeah. I mean, like definitely, particularly when there's a voice that might be singing to you, for instance. Because we all know that we communicate with voice, but to communicate through music with voice, that connection that's the most human connection, right? Like, I mean, I can sit there and I can listen to instrumental music. Like, let's say I was listening to a Miles Davis album.
Yeah.
And I can be moved by many things within that, right? But I'm not connected in the same way that if there was a voice on that record, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously a good voice, but you know, if there was a voice on that record, that's a different type of connection, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting because it's like, if you look at, in terms of recorded music anyway, the sort of percentage of recorded music that's sold that is instrumental music, and the amount that's vocal. I actually don't know what the breakdown is, but exactly. But the vast majority of it's got a vocal, at least to sort of the wider kind of music consuming audience.
Yeah.
Why is it they sort of need a vocal?
Yeah,
right. Why,
it's not just
do we
about
wanna
it
hear-
being catchy and repetitive, because there's lots of instrumental music that plays the same little section again and again, like a chorus. So it can't just be that. There's something about having the voice,
the human voice.
voice that.
Obviously, I'm a vocal coach, right? So voice is kind of my thing. But I've played piano. I've played drums. I've played a bunch of other instruments in bands as well. But this is one of the painful things for guitarists, like in your traditional kind of band, right, where you've got guitar, bass, drums, and then a singer. I think this is one of the most painful things for guitarists, isn't it? Right, because they've made a decision to distinctly not be in the rhythm section, right?
Yeah.
They want to have this fancy thing, and they want to be able to show off, but they ain't gonna reach most people in the same numbers that a good singer will.
Yeah.
And it's and I think it comes down to this connection. It's almost like the closer to a real human being something is, the kind of the wider net you can cast with the people that are going to be interested in it, I think.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think
so. Yeah.
And that's it's funny because that's sort of, there's one of the things I think we have kind of mentioned is why does my brain like listening to a certain instrument, and somebody else would go, oh, I hate the sound of that instrument. Like somebody like, I remember being in a room where there was it was a lesson about people just talking about the different types of music they like, and one person was just like, I cannot hear brass music, I cannot listen to it, I would have to leave the room.
Wow.
Probably being a bit over the top. But that's obviously an extreme version of it. I'm like, I quite like a bit of brass, actually, quite like it.
Well,
why does
I
one
feel a bit that
sound-
way about synth strings.
Right.
Oh God, yeah, you've got.
I quite like a synth string.
I can't. No,
I like a good 80s synth string.
No, far too many great records have been ruined with
God.
synth strings.
How
can't.
do we always have this conversation?
And it's an important conversation because these
Well.
synth strings disrupt us.
Well,
they
that's
ruin
funny.
things.
I find it funny because not particularly the synth strings thing, but I don't think there's an instrument. Me personally, I don't think there's an instrument that annoys me enough to be like, I can't listen to that instrument, right? But there are sounds that annoy me, right? And I suppose if we're thinking about it, Ben, a synth string is a synthetic sound.
Yeah.
And it's not really an instrument, is it, as such? It's a created sound. It's a man-made sound.
Yeah, but I don't feel the same way, right, about, say, like a synth sub bass or and to be fair, right, just use them tastefully. Right? If you're gonna do it, like, I almost don't want, sometimes where you have those instruments in a mix where, like, you can't really tell it's there, but when you hit the mute button, it's like it feels empty somehow, right? Fine. If that's your synth string part,
Want it as a space.
fine.
Yeah.
I don't want to know it's there. I just don't want to.
You don't want it to be the star of the show.
But then why? If it's going to be like a synth pad, make it a synth pad. It's this thing about it trying to be a string that I have a bugbear, and I can't necessarily put my finger on exactly why. I've probably had some bad experience with synth strings in my time.
Yeah, you probably
as an arranger or composer or
couldn't
something.
program them properly or something.
You're probably right. You're probably
But then,
right.
as opposed to just why something, because I suppose it's easier to go kind of say why something bugs you or annoys you, but then why are you drawn to one sound over another, or one style of music over another, or
This is true.
why does somebody love country music and another person detests it? Why? Like,
This is true.
Is it personal experience? Maybe
I think it's got a lot to do with personal experience, and also like I would say, going back to the social thing, right? When we talk about the social aspect of music and experiencing it in social settings, for the most part, music, particularly when we think about how it's been commoditized over the years, will also align itself with certain lifestyles, right? And obviously this is a sweeping generalization, but I probably don't listen to as much classical music as I want to. I really do love classical music. I probably don't listen to as much of it as I want to because it feels like it's a bit bougie. And I don't live that kind of life, right?
Yeah.
Like that's one of the, because it's like those typical, well, oh yes, we'll be going to dinner and we'll be playing this concerto and blah 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 blah, and it's just like, and it's so funny actually that I mentioned classical music because Chris, so I live kind of like around where Chris lives, and we live near a tube station, an underground station, and they purposely play classical music there because. Not because they think it's going to calm people down, but they think it's because it's going to stop people from hanging around there. Because the people who hang around there aren't the kind of people who will listen to classical music.
Wow, yeah. So
Right?
it's a mechanism for social control.
Exactly. So they use it as a deterrent, right?
A deterrent,
of these youths, of these.
Wait, are you telling me they're weaponizing classical music here?
Well, it seems like they might be. We need to have a chat with our local tube station, I feel. But I think, coming back to what we were saying, I think that it's got so much to do with social experiences. Like, when I was younger, a lot of the reason that I got into R&B music was because a lot of my friends were listening to R&B music. My circle of friends. And they'd be like, oh yeah, check this guy out. Oh, have you heard this Boyz II Men song? Oh, blah, 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 blah. And that's what it would be. Like, and that is so influential, isn't it? But it can also be like, if you're trying to impress someone and you're like, and they're like particularly when you're younger, and they're like, oh yeah, I really love jazz music. And you didn't like jazz music, but all of a sudden you're like, let me just check out some jazz music because I want to impress this person, There's a lot to do with that social thing, in my experience anyway.
I think you're right.
From my experience is that I personally liked everything that was the absolute antithesis of what my friends liked.
But then,
how does that happen?
But then you are still being influenced by your social circle, or whatever it is. But you're just going the other way, right? But
that sounds,
maybe.
Chris. That sounds, Chris. Sorry to interrupt a minute. That sounds like you haven't really moved on from your 4-year-old self, right? You just want to make some noise, right? Like, I am not like you.
I don't need to.
I am not like whatever you are. I am not that.
Yeah.
But I do think that's a function for certainly pop music. Different pop styles is definitely when you're going through that period in your life and you just want to be whatever your parents aren't, right? It's like, I'm going to listen to whatever's cool now, and there's this thing, in my day, you used to be able to hear what the vocalists were saying. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You used to be able to hear the words, right? And it's like, whatever music means you can't hear the words, that's what you want when you're 14, right?
Because there's definitely a thing of that, like like for me, in sort of adolescence, like gravitating towards sort of, stuff like, I don't know, more sort of goth and sort of the Limp Bizkit and the Corn of the Days and stuff like that, which was exactly, which was a definite just be angry. Just
well, I mean, that's fair. I find it so
But
interesting
yeah.
that you would say that, because particularly because Ben's picked up on the fact that you know, when you were 4 you just wanted to make some noise, and then you were like, not many people are listening to this noise, I still want that noise in my life.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you're like you guys are listening to whatever you want to listen to, I'm on that noise shit basically. And so you're just noising it up, and you know, I'm glad that you've changed, Chris.
Well, when that became, because then shortly after that became like what everyone was listening to, and I was like, I'm going to go and listen to some folk now. Bye.
Yeah, exactly. Always, Chris is like, I'm bucking the trend. Whatever the trend is, I'm bucking it.
Just either 7 steps behind the trend, or I don't know.
Light years ahead, maybe.
Maybe, let's go for that.
Light years ahead. Better.
Yeah. But also, I think I was like, at that particular stage of my life, it was, I don't know, that 13, 14-year-old, I'm just angry.
Yeah, true.
I'm just angry as hell.
True. And I suppose that's...
Yeah, there's a little bit of growing up that happens. I don't know. But then not everybody expresses it in that way. Some people express it in kind of, I don't know.
I suppose that kind of brings us back to what we were talking about in terms of like on a personal level as well, when you guys were talking and you were saying about, you know, wanting to change your mood or to reflect your mood. Like all you were doing at that time was reflecting your mood. You were saying, right, I was angry and I wanted to reflect that. And that's what kind of like part of what it meant to you. There was the social aspect as well. One question that I would like to ask you guys, how influenced were you by the music that your parents played in the house?
I was quite deeply influenced in a way that bothered me. And I hadn't noticed it. So I have one specific experience of when I was doing my the A-level equivalent BTEC national diploma in popular music. Smashed it, yeah. When I was doing that, we had a songwriting module unit, and I was doing these harmony parts, and my mum is well into her kind of folk and classical, and anything that doesn't have drums in, you know, anything that's kind of rootsy, earthy, kind of organic, quote unquote, real instruments, you know, you get the picture. She was into Simon and Garfunkel.
Yeah.
And I remember my teacher saying, "Oh, you know, this reminds me of Simon and Garfunkel," and like I just was like, "What?
How dare you?
How dare you?" Right? At the time, I was. It was all about Oasis and indie rock, and you know, but these harmonies apparently were
right.
So it sunk in, like it got in, and you know, since then I've opened up to a lot of it, you know, and I love a lot of that kind of acoustic stuff, you know, whether it's folk or country or, you know, so I've bedded into it, but certainly at that age there was resistance.
Interesting. What about you, Chris?
I'd say actually, like one of my earliest memories is that song. Oh God, "Wonderful Life" by. And for some reason,
wonderful life. That.
No need to. Yeah, it's that one.
Okay.
And
is it by Black?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yeah. That's right. And it was on the radio, and it's like I remember it was. Don't know if it was my mom or dad or who had it on, but it was definitely the radio had it on, and it's like I remember that playing, and whenever I hear that song now, rarely do, but whenever I hear it, it is the most visceral memory. It's like literally like a flashback in one of those films when you're there. It is so visceral, and there's a few other things like that would probably be. I know the War of the Worlds soundtrack makes me feel that way too. There is a song of the War of the Worlds soundtrack called "Forever Autumn," and I hear that, and it's like I can smell what my house smelled like.
House was like. Yeah.
I can literally feel where I was sitting on the floor, what that felt like. It's literally like being transported back in time. So It obviously did, because it's made some kind of neural pathway in my brain or something that is like fully just like a permanent connection that it's made, so that
time travel.
It's almost like it feels like that. It almost does, because it's so visceral.
It's insane, isn't it?
It's that, and probably what else? There would be a couple of other. Oh, the Tubular Bells.
Oh yeah,
that damn album, and even actually just seeing the cover, seeing the
actual
vinyl cover of it,
yeah.
seeing the artwork of it, is so extremely visceral. So it obviously has played in it. Even though I would say, well, I don't, when I started making music and stuff, I wasn't making 80s pop, and I wasn't making Tubular Bells. I can tell you that for free. But it just, it obviously has made even though I wouldn't necessarily point to it like you were saying, Ben, like as in an influence, an obvious musical influence. It obviously has massively it had some influence, because it's such a visceral memory.
That's mad, isn't it? It's so funny, because I grew up largely listening to Bollywood music and traditional Pakistani music as well. So it would be basically Bollywood Indian film music or traditional Pakistani music. And I don't really think I experienced like loads of Western music, as it were. For years, really. Like I wasn't really around it, because my mum and dad, like they both were immigrants, and they were and they wanted to keep a sense of their culture, and they didn't really listen to loads of English music. I mean, I think my mum came to England when she was 12, and she'd know about like old records, like what was her favorite one? When will I see you again by the 3 Degrees and all of this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And things like Donny Osmond and all of that kind of stuff. That was like, but my mum would hear that on the radio and whatnot. But her like what she would gravitate towards would be more like that traditional music or the film music of Bollywood. And I didn't really have anywhere else to go until I like started like going to school, and then really and truly, like I said, I picked up violin when I was young, so that would be classical music. I wasn't really listening to popular music for a while. It was a long while before I started listening to popular music. I think initially there was a bit of pushback from me. Like I was like, "Oh, what you listen to this Bollywood stuff for? It's like old and it's crap and all of this kind of stuff." But I mean, as again, like kind of like Ben, over time you form this appreciation for it, and there is definitely, like you said, Chris, for me as well. There's that kind of like, there's a bit of teleportation that happens, or time travel that happens with certain songs. Will just take you back, and I can even remember the first time I heard a few songs. Like there was. Who was it that covered "Don't Leave Me This Way"? Was it like Erasure or someone like that? I think it was like
someone like
kind of like late 80s like that.
Yeah.
I remember being at my uncle's house and listening to that song for the first time and watching the video and hearing those kind of like 80s drum machines kind of going, and I was like, oh, this is a cool song,
Yeah, that's it.
But I can remember his house, like I can remember what it looked like, and who was there and all of this kind of stuff, which kind of says a lot about what music. I mean, we think of music as an auditory experience, but it's really, if we're talking about sights and smells,
sensory,
and feelings, it's like it's a much more sensory experience, isn't it?
Yeah. And you can see
I mean, I would say it is on one level just particles vibrating in the air, and then our eardrums wiggle, and then something goes on. And it's also all this other very deep, whether it's spiritual, whether it's memory invocation, whether it's mood management, whether it's deeply valuable, and it's just particles wiggling around in an organized way.
Well, yeah, that's the boring description.
That's what it physically is.
Right. Yeah.
But then your brain turns it into something else.
Yeah, and
when it goes physically into your eardrums, into your inner ear, and then the signals get sent to your brain. then it gets turned into something else, because then it gets connected to emotions or to a memory, and I think it's really like when you see like in patients that have sort of advanced Alzheimer's or advanced dementia, that when they've played bits of like when they've kind of come back to sort of, you know, full sort of almost full like memory of something, is when they've played a piece of music from either their childhood or something that they loved, and it's amazing. It's like a light switches on for a moment, and that is, you know, I think there's few things that sort of do that as much as music does. And I don't know loads about that sort of like, you know, music therapy, music treatment that's used for dementia, but I know that there's obviously something really powerful there, because I think we've both seen videos of you know, of patients like that have kind of recovered a memory because of a piece of music, and you see the, you know, the sort of joy it brings, you see the kind of awakening almost, and I think that's just particles vibrating in the air or vibrating in there, you know, that then go into your ear and then get sent by these little fibers down to the ear canal and then something happens in your brain where that all then gets processed and turned into, it gets attached to a memory, attached to a feeling, you know, and then becomes something completely different.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we're kind of at a place to wrap up now, because I feel like
I'm going to go and cry. I think we probably should.
but just a nice, and I think it's a really nice first podcast. It's like just another little affirmation that like music matters, right? It's really valuable for a whole host of reasons, and it's worth talking about.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, man.
I agree.
All right.
And hopefully people will like to listen to us talking about it.
Yeah. Just on that, if you're hearing this and there's an ability for you to comment, feel free to comment. If you can like it, subscribe it, star it. We're going to be putting the podcast up in a few different places. So the specific ways in which you can give us a little bit of feedback will differ depending on which place you're hearing this or seeing this. Just give us some love and we'll give you some love back. All right.
We definitely will.
Bye.
I'm waving. Bye.
Now for now.